The 10th time I pretended to be dead to scare my husband, I scared the secretary who was sending him home. For the first time, he lost his temper with me. Aren't you tired of acting all the time? If you really want to die, just go ahead. He doesn't know that I'm actually dying. Each act was just to make it less painful for him in the future. But as I watched him gently comfort his secretary, I suddenly wondered. When he finds out the truth, will he regret it? Chapter 1. After hearing the sound of the password door unlocking, I put down the powder and looked in the mirror. Even the lightest shade can barely cover my deteriorating complexion, and the bloodstain on my t-shirt, accidentally coughed up, looks more realistic than anything on TV. I collapsed on the floor. The next second, the door was pushed open. But it was a girl's terrified scream that broke the silence. I lay there for a good while before opening my eyes, only to see a girl throwing herself into Davis's arms. She cried pitifully, "President Davis, I'm so scared." It was Davis's secretary, Lisa. Davis hesitated but didn't push her away. When he finally turned to look at me, his eyes were full of impatience. "How much ketchup did you use this time? Julia, are you addicted to acting?" Lisa clung to his arm, reluctantly letting go when she saw me open my eyes. "Julia, that was too scary. It's okay if I got frightened, but what if something happened to President Davis since he's drunk today?" I stared at their intimate interaction, and there was no guilt in Davis's eyes. "Aren't you going to get up?" I said, "I don't have the strength." He didn't believe me and roughly pulled me up. It was the first time I'd seen him so angry with me, and it was all because of another woman. "Julia, aren't you tired of this? I work tirelessly at the office every day for this family. I don't expect you to understand, but don't cause trouble for me." Lisa handed him a glass of water. "President Davis, Julia didn't mean to." Davis clenched his fist at his side, then threw the cup heavily to the ground. The shards scattered, and one of them cut my wrist. Bright red blood immediately started flowing. There are many things she doesn't know. Davis looked at me, his expression filled with annoyance and indifference. "Always pretending to be dead. If you really want to die, then just do it." Chapter 2. Davis was wrong. There are many things I know. I know he's very busy at work, so I make soup for him every day to nourish his body. I know he often works late, so I always stay up late, waiting for him to come home. I also know that he can hold his liquor well, so why did he need Lisa to take him home this time? Because he was drunk? Was it to build rapport between a boss and a subordinate for smooth working relationships? I sat in the hallway all night, and in the end, I laughed out loud at myself. People passing by were startled, cursing at me. What bad luck. I hugged my arms. The hallway was so cold. Davis was probably really drunk. After Lisa left, he dragged me outside, telling me to wake up and stop causing trouble. I was locked outside, and no matter how hard I knocked, there was no response. Because Davis had fallen asleep. The blood from the cut on my wrist had already stopped. I pressed on it. It hurt a bit, but compared to the pain I felt when I was diagnosed with late-stage stomach cancer, it was nothing. I didn't bring my phone out, so I had nowhere to go. Suddenly, I remembered the day I first pretended to be dead, how Davis was so shocked that his face turned pale. His hands trembled as he held me. As if the sky had fallen, he carefully called out to me, "Juju." Then I suddenly opened my eyes, grinning as I replied, "I'm here." Davis stared at me in a daze, then hurriedly wiped away his tears. He wanted to say something but didn't. He just held me tighter. His eyes told me, he was scared. This was the quickest way I could think of to make it less painful for him in the future. And I did it. Chapter 3. The next day, Davis opened the door and pulled me inside. He had these beautiful puppy eyes that always looked a bit innocent when he lowered them. "I'm sorry, Julia. I can't believe I left you outside all night." Then he gently touched my stomach, coaxing me, "Your tummy must be starving, it's all my fault." See, even when comforting me, it's been a long time since he called me Julia. I should be angry and blame him for making me freeze all night. Today is a day off, and I want him to spend the whole day with me. First, watch a movie with me. In the movie, the husband comes home every day to find his wife pretending to be dead in various ways. Davis gradually frowned. "Is this where you got it from?" He paused the movie. Are you too idle? Learning from a movie to mess with me. I didn't look at him, just stared at the screen and said, but her husband finds it adorable. Davis interrupted me with a cold laugh. A movie is just a movie. In reality, it's annoying as hell. I admit that I was a bit harsh with you yesterday because I was drunk, but you need to listen to me. The reality is that it's not cute at all, it's annoying. Do you understand? His voice wasn't loud, and his tone was calm. But it felt like a small, sharp needle suddenly piercing my heart. I was grateful that the room was dim, with only the faint light from the screen illuminating our faces. He couldn't see my stiff smile. Of course, I understood. Maybe the wife in the movie understood too. We've watched half of it already. Just watch the rest with me. Suddenly, a sharp ringtone interrupted me. Davis pulled out his phone, and Lisa's name flashed on the screen. Lisa's panicked voice came through clearly. President Davis, I think I messed up the recent deal. Their boss touched me, and when I refused, Davis shot up, grabbed his coat, and headed for the door. I tried to grab him but was met with his heavy gaze. He said, "Don't make a fuss." Then he brushed my hand away. The door slammed shut. The movie continued to play. The truth was revealed. The wife had a terminal illness. The husband thought she was pretending again and jokingly nudged her. "Hey, stop pretending. Today, I found a really good restaurant. I'll take you there." But his wife would never wake up again. As the movie reached its end, my phone rang as well. It was Lisa calling. I heard Davis's voice, gentle and considerate, comforting her, "Don't cry anymore. Losing the deal is fine, it's just one deal. Are you hungry? I'll take you to eat. There's a new restaurant near the company." Lisa cheerfully responded, "Okay, then I have to treat CEO Davis to a nice meal." I suddenly spoke up. "Which restaurant? How about I join too?" Chapter 4. The air froze for a second, immediately followed by the beeping sound of the call being hung up. Lisa probably didn't expect me to speak up. But it doesn't matter, I know where that restaurant is. Because I had mentioned it before. It's a couple's restaurant. I once begged Davis many times to go with me. What did he say? He said he was too busy making money, busy supporting the family. On our wedding anniversary, he brushed me off, saying, "Julia, can you stop making a fuss?" That night, he stayed at the office. Later, I saw Lisa's post on social media. The entire company was empty, except for the two of them. Davis, without his glasses, looked relaxed, with a cup of hot tea beside him. A stark contrast to his impatience when dealing with me at home. Lisa posed for the camera with a peace sign, "Late night working together, the boss is working hard." That's when I first noticed Lisa. And now, Davis, who always refused to take me to that restaurant, was taking Lisa instead. When I arrived, I only saw Davis alone. He was leaning lazily against the car. Seeing me, there wasn't the slightest surprise on his face, just a deep drag on his cigarette. I looked at him, finished eating so soon. Not eating anymore. Davis blew a smoke ring in my direction. "Julia, you're really boring." In the swirling smoke, his gaze at me was filled with nothing but weariness. My chest tightened in pain, and I looked away awkwardly. "Where's your coat?" The car window suddenly rolled down, revealing Lisa's slightly flushed face. She sat in the front passenger seat, draped in Davis's suit jacket, biting her lip as she smiled at me. "Julia, sorry, I accidentally hit the wrong button and called your phone." Davis stubbed out his cigarette. "Get in the car. She was scared tonight, I need to take her home." Seeing me still staring at Lisa, he finally bothered to explain, "She gets car sick. It's more comfortable for her in the front seat. So, I deserve to give up my seat for her, is that it?" I found it absurd. A secretary, how precious is she? She gets taken advantage of, and her first thought is to call her boss. She gets car sick, so it's only natural she takes the boss's wife's seat. Seeing my displeasure, Lisa bit her lip. "Julia, are you upset? I'll just head home by myself." "CEO Davis, don't worry about tonight's incident. It's all my fault for being careless. I shouldn't have troubled you." After saying that, she tried to get out of the car, but Davis stopped her. He frowned. Julia, do you have any empathy at all? She's in this situation because of me. As a woman, why can't you understand her? I stared at his indignant face. She said she was taken advantage of, and you believed her. No woman would tarnish her own reputation to slander someone else. She said she accidentally dialed my number, and you believed that too? Davis paused. She's not that kind of person. I suddenly wanted to laugh. What is this? He trusts his secretary unconditionally? A scorching sense of suffocation burned through me, leaving me gasping for air. I couldn't help but bend over. I'm not getting in the car. Davis lowered his voice. What are you doing now? He grabbed my hand, opened the back door, and tried to force me in. It hurt so much. I felt like I was about to be driven mad by the pain. I'm not getting in the car. I screamed, using all my strength to shake off his hand. Davis was stunned. He has always had his way. Even when we first started dating, I was the one who pursued him. In this relationship, it was always me who lowered myself. This was the first time I stood up to him. After he came to his senses, Davis sneered, Julia, you've grown a backbone. Not getting in the car, huh? He got in the car and slammed the door shut. Then you can stay here. The car drove off right in front of me. I saw Lisa inside, tilting her head at me, adjusting Davis's jacket that was slipping off her shoulders. I stood there, dazed, for a long time. I called Davis, but unsurprisingly, he didn't answer. I opened the messaging app, typing and deleting multiple times. Finally, I sent him this. Davis, let's get a divorce. Chapter 5. I went to that restaurant by myself. A couple's restaurant, even the dish names were full of affection. The waiter paused for a moment when he saw me. Are you alone? He mumbled softly. Why would someone come to a couple's restaurant alone? I smiled and said nothing. The taste wasn't as good as I had imagined. I suddenly couldn't remember why I was so obsessed with Davis taking me here in the first place. It started raining outside, and Davis said he wouldn't care about me, and he really didn't. That waiter suddenly ran over and handed me an umbrella. You look so pale. Go home soon. No matter how sad you are, don't joke around with your health. My nose tingled. How strange. No matter how much it hurt before, I didn't feel like crying, but at this moment, I almost couldn't hold back. When I got home and opened the door, I was greeted by Davis's cold face. He looked me up and down, taking in my disheveled state, regretting it? Regretting not getting in the car, regretting standing up to him? Even a stranger could see how pale I looked, yet he was still fixated on whether or not I would yield. I stared at this man who was supposed to be my husband, and slowly shook my head. Davis's face darkened. Before he could speak, I asked him, Did you see the text message? What text message? He instinctively looked down, then seemed to realize something. His voice immediately turned serious. What are you up to now? Julia, you're becoming more and more unreasonable. I used to overlook your small tantrums, but this time, you even brought up divorce. You think you can threaten me with divorce? So, in his eyes, everything I do is just being difficult. I wiped my eyes. I wasn't crying, but they were burning. I looked at him as if I was seeing this person for the first time. I don't want anything. I just want a divorce. Seeing that I wasn't joking, Davis calmed down. I know we've been arguing a lot lately, but that's no excuse for you to act so recklessly. He rubbed his temples. Juju, you can't live without me. Don't call me Juju. I took a deep breath and tried very hard to soften my tone, to stop myself from sounding like a shrew. Now he remembered to call me Juju. He's always like this, using my name only during arguments. What does he take me for? Even comforting a child requires more sincerity. I've already had the divorce agreement drafted. Tonight, please sleep in the guest room. Davis, continuously defied by me, was trembling with anger. I'll move out. I'll give you time to calm down. He sneered, Julia, I'll be waiting for you to beg me to come back. Chapter 6. But why would I beg him? I'm almost dead anyway. With Davis gone, I slept the deepest sleep, so deep that I almost thought I wouldn't wake up. But I was woken by the sound of banging on the door. When I opened it, it was my mom. She anxiously grabbed my hand. "What's going on with you? Why did you have a fight with Davis?" When I didn't say anything, she became agitated. "Davis has such good prospects. If you don't want him, where will you find someone as good in the future?" "But I don't have a future anymore." I wanted to say that, but the next words out of my mom's mouth sent me plummeting into an icy abyss. "Your brother is about to graduate from college, and the family was hoping Davis could help arrange a job for him. You ungrateful girl, why are you causing trouble at a time like this?" She looked at me with bitter disappointment. "Listen to your mother, go apologize to Davis quickly." Then she gripped my hand tightly and started dragging me out. Due to my illness, my wrist had become so thin, but she didn't care. Her nails dug deep into my flesh, all for the sake of her son getting a good job. I thought she'd at least care about why I wanted a divorce, but she didn't. "After all, I'm her child too." I said, "I'm not going." She glared at me. "You ungrateful wretch. I raised you all these years, and you don't even care about your brother's future." A violent wave of nausea hit me. I pulled my hand away and, using all my strength, pushed her out the door. Then I collapsed to the ground, dizzy and disoriented. I don't know how long passed before my phone suddenly rang. It was Davis. He said coldly, "Julia, your mom came to my office. She begged me not to divorce you." Chapter 7. When I arrived at the office, a crowd had already gathered outside. Davis stood there, while my mom knelt on the ground, crying her heart out. Lisa handed me a glass of water. "Julia, you should go talk to her." She glanced inside and smiled slightly. "After all, it's quite a scene." I met Davis's gaze. There was indifference in his eyes, and mockery too. It was as if he was saying, "See, I told you I'd be waiting for you to beg me. Now your mother is doing it for you." All of this made my heart suddenly tremble. It felt like being slapped hard, leaving no trace of calm. I slowly, very slowly, pushed open the door and pulled my mom to her feet. She refused to go, gripping my flesh tightly. "You ungrateful girl. I won't leave." It hurt so much. It really hurt. "Is there anyone who can save me?" I looked around in confusion at everyone watching, all of them enjoying the show. No one could save me. The last thing I saw was Davis's suddenly alarmed expression. I finally couldn't hold on and coughed up a mouthful of blood. Chapter 8. When I woke up, I was in a familiar hospital. Davis sat by the bedside, his expression complicated. I thought he knew. When he saw I was awake, he tucked the blanket around me. "The doctor said your condition is due to pent-up anger." Oh, he still didn't know. I had told the doctors here to keep my illness a secret. Originally, it was so he wouldn't be so sad later. But now, I've changed my mind. He said, "Let's stop fighting, okay? This time it's my fault. I shouldn't have made you so angry. Let's not divorce." He kept babbling on. It's funny, I haven't seen him this anxious about me in a long time. I stared at him for a long while, then said, "Okay." Davis was stunned. His face lit up with surprise. "You agreed, so you can't take it back." I nodded. "I won't take it back." He seemed genuinely happy. He personally arranged everything for my hospital stay. He didn't go to work anymore, and set up a small desk in my hospital room to work from there. Lisa would occasionally come by to drop off documents. Each time, she would bite her lip and linger for a while, but Davis never looked at her again. Deliver the documents and leave. The air in the hospital room isn't good with too many people. Lisa's eyes turned red, and then she clicked away in her high heels. After I fell asleep, Davis suddenly called out, "Juju?" Seeing that I didn't respond, he got up and left the room. I stood at the doorway, quietly watching as Lisa hugged him. "Davis, I like you." Davis had his back to me, so I couldn't see his expression. Was he happy? Hesitant? The sunlight streamed through the window, casting a glow over them, making them look like the perfect couple. If only I weren't Davis's legal wife. So, I cleared my throat. I'm not sure if it was my imagination, but for a split second, Davis's body seemed to stiffen. Then he turned around and looked straight at me. Juju. He pushed Lisa away and walked toward me in large strides. It's not what you think. He seemed genuinely anxious, his usually well-groomed hair was now disheveled. She confessed to me, and I was just about to turn her down. I watched his frustration for a while, then slowly reached out to smooth down his hair. I know, she made the first move. I don't blame you. Davis's expression finally relaxed. I looked at him, but I don't like her. Can you change your secretary? Our eyes met, and Davis lowered his gaze. He agreed, okay. Chapter 9. Soon after, Davis hired a new secretary. Perhaps to ease my mind, this time, the secretary was male. I didn't want to stay in the hospital any longer, but Davis was worried. Stay a few more days. What if there's something they haven't detected yet? I smiled but said nothing. What could be worse than a terminal illness? He couldn't persuade me, so in the end, we packed up and went home. I hadn't yet returned the borrowed umbrella, and when I found him, he was just telling the boss he was quitting. It was a college student working a summer job. Sis, if you'd come a bit later, you wouldn't have found me. I smiled and handed him the umbrella. He suddenly leaned in, studying my face. Sis, are you sick? Instinctively, I took a step back and said nothing. Trust me, I'm a medical student. Something seems off with you. I had the same feeling when you came to eat that day. I suggest you go to the hospital for a checkup. At that moment, I heard the faint click of a camera. I turned around, but saw no one. That night, when I got home, Davis's expression was unpleasant. He threw a stack of photos onto the table. What's this all about? The angles were cleverly taken, giving the impression that I was kissing the guy. I looked at each one, and Davis's expression grew darker and darker. The company is about to go public, and we can't afford any scandals right now. Fortunately, the PR department intercepted these before they got out. I blinked. I just went to return an umbrella. What kind of umbrella requires you to go in person? Why don't you use the assistant I gave you? Besides, meeting him alone like that, what does it look like? I was genuinely puzzled. He helped me. Is there a problem with returning an umbrella? How does it look bad? We weren't even hugging. And this obvious trick of using angles, just get the boss to pull up the surveillance footage, and it can be resolved. Davis frowned and immediately questioned, do you have any sense of responsibility? You're married. Meeting another man alone is inappropriate. I was taken aback by his words. Looking at the unusually angry man in front of me, I softly asked, you're asking if I have a sense of responsibility in our marriage? Then Davis, do you? The atmosphere suddenly became eerily quiet. The anger in Davis's expression gradually faded, replaced by a hint of guilt. Just as he was about to say something, I smiled and said, I'm just kidding. Lisa's already gone. What could I be unhappy about? He lowered his eyes and looked at me for a few seconds, then suddenly reached out and hugged me, burying his head in my neck. Wife, you're the best. Chapter 10. I played along with Davis for 3 whole years. His company wanted to go public, and building connections was essential. For example, Mr. Smith and his wife had been together since they were young, growing old side by side, deeply in love. As long as Davis and I appeared to be a loving couple, we could win their favor. While Davis and Mr. Smith discussed business, I sat in the shade and chatted with Mrs. Smith. Before leaving, Davis handed me a few candies. Wait for me to come back, okay? Mrs. Smith smiled and said, oh, how sweet. The sun on the beach was warm, but I was growing colder and colder. Davis held my hand and frowned, why are your hands so cold? Maybe it's just cold hands. I wanted to explain, but it didn't seem convincing, so I cupped his face with both hands. Isn't it nice? With me by your side, you'll stay cool. He stared intently at me. I pulled my hands back and looked away. There's hot milk tea over there. Can you get me a cup? Davis followed my gaze, then seemed to pause as if he saw something. But he still said, okay. He brought over a blanket and carefully wrapped me up completely. It had been years since I'd seen this attentive side of him. Watching his back as he walked away, I suddenly wanted to call him back. Davis, I don't want the tea anymore. Don't go, okay? But he didn't turn around, only saying, "Stop it." Then he strode off in that direction. The direction where Lisa was. I had seen her a long time ago. Her beautiful face, paired with a bright red dress, made her stand out in any crowd. She had been watching us for a long time. And as expected, once my husband noticed her, he went over to her. Mutual affection. I huddled under the blanket. In a summer where everyone was wearing light clothing, I felt like an outcast. It seemed like I slept for a long time. Someone touched my head. I thought it was Davis, but when I opened my eyes, it was Mrs. Smith. "Why are you sleeping here all alone?" Alone? So I understood that Davis never came back. He went to get me some milk tea. When Davis returned and saw Mrs. Smith, his expression changed slightly. Mrs. Smith invited him to sit down, so attentive. "Julia said the milk tea she wanted was quite far, and you really went out in this scorching sun to get it." Davis was stunned and handed the milk tea to me. He lowered his head slightly, his messy hair covering part of his eyes, making him appear unusually embarrassed. Only I knew that the milk tea had already gone cold. Davis slowly took my hand, intertwining our fingers. Amidst Mrs. Smith's praise, I drank the cold milk tea, sip by sip. It tasted awful. Chapter 11. I meticulously arranged a curtain call for my death. On the day the company went public, Davis was exceptionally excited. He lifted me up and spun me around. "Julia, I'm finally going to make it." I gently wrapped my arms around his neck and said nothing. He pinched my wrist bones with his fingers. "Why have you lost so much weight?" After I fell ill, I had already become nothing but skin and bones, but he only noticed it now. The pain returned. Leaning against his chest, I trembled slightly. He was still immersed in his own joy. "I'll earn more money in the future and fatten you up." But one should never make declarations too early. The higher the flag is raised, the harder the fall. Davis stood on stage, delivering his final speech. When it came to the thank yous, he mentioned me. He said he was grateful for my companionship over the years, for the nights I stayed up for him, and for the soups I made. He said without me, there would be no him today. Finally, he said he loved me. I looked into his eyes and seemed to see a glimpse of the 20-year-old Davis. 3 years, and everything had changed. Davis invited me on stage to prove our loving relationship one last time. The projection suddenly lit up. He looked at me affectionately. "For 3 years of marriage, I've documented every little moment." His voice abruptly stopped. Under his suddenly pale expression, I turned to look at the screen. One by one, the photos displayed were of him and Lisa together. The audience was in an uproar. Davis gripped my hand tightly. "Turn it off." It couldn't be turned off. All the backstage operators were arranged by me. Releasing such a scandal during the company's public listing event, with so many eyes watching. Davis was finished. For the first time, I exercised my rights as Mrs. Davis to stab him in the back. Surprised, "Davis? This is my farewell gift to you." The video that was supposed to prove our loving marriage instead turned into evidence of his affair. Davis's eyes were bloodshot as he smashed the projector in a frenzy. The projector shattered on the ground, broken into pieces. Just like our marriage, torn apart. The audience dispersed, and the media frantically took photos of us. They even dragged someone out. It was the main character from the video, Lisa. Her evening gown was wrinkled, and her carefully applied makeup was ruined. She was surrounded by the media, relentlessly questioned. "You knew all along." Davis stared at me, gripping my hand tighter and tighter. As if he wanted to strangle me. My vision darkened, and I suddenly coughed up a mouthful of blood. Davis froze, stepping back. I smiled through tears. "Davis, you're finished, and Lisa won't get away either." At that moment, the PR team came to him. He gritted his teeth and then averted his gaze. "I'll deal with you when I get back." Davis left. I collapsed against the wall, utterly exhausted. The relentless questioning grew louder around me. Countless media outlets buzzed in my ears. "When did President Davis start the affair? Did you release these photos? Do you regret marrying President Davis?" The flashlights blinded me, but my vision only grew darker. I closed my eyes and smiled. "I regret it." They say that in your final moments, you see the most beautiful scenes from your memories. I saw the 20-year-old Davis again, carefully asking if I would marry him. He joyfully tried to take my hand. But this time, I didn't agree. I said, no. I won't marry Davis again. It's too painful.
Chapter 12. Davis's perspective. Julia is dead. When Mrs. Smith told him, his first reaction was that Julia was lying again. Even before seeing the body, he was furious. It was one thing to pretend and scare him, but how dare she frighten Mrs. Smith this time? Because of her disruption, the company suffered a massive loss, and he would never forgive Julia. Mrs. Smith cried so hard that she fainted, and it was hard to imagine how well Julia had gotten along with her. Davis, don't be too sad. Everyone told him to grieve and move on. He only found it absurd that Julia's acting was so good she fooled everyone. Julia suffered so much from her illness, it's a relief that she passed this way. What were they talking about? What illness? It wasn't until the police came to take her away that he snapped out of it. He hurriedly blocked Julia, not letting them touch her. She's not dead. She's faking it. What illness? I'm her husband, I would know, wouldn't I? She wasn't sick. Don't let her fool you. But no one believed him. Julia, say something. You always loved to play dead, didn't you? After pretending, you should open your eyes, right? You fooled so many people, and yet you're still not satisfied. For some reason, his hands uncontrollably trembled, and his entire body felt cold. Open your eyes. He had only been gone for a while, so how could everyone suddenly say she was dead? The police forcibly pulled him away, and Mrs. Smith angrily threw a hospital re-examination report at him. Her voice was choked with sobs as she questioned. Did you know she was sick? She's already lying here, and you still say she's pretending. His hearing seemed to fail him. Mrs. Smith's sobs echoed in his ears intermittently, like a red, drizzling rain, pitifully eroding his eardrums. Davis, I thought you truly loved her, but you didn't even know she was ill. You cheated with your secretary, and now you say such things. He widened his eyes, instinctively wanting to retort. But he suddenly realized that there had been clues all along, he just never paid attention. Like when Julia suddenly started pretending to be dead, or when her face grew increasingly pale. And also, the increasingly affectionate glances she gave him. He clutched his chest, the pain in his heart was so intense that it felt like he couldn't breathe, gasping for air. And now, all he could do was watch as Julia was taken away by the police. He wanted to chase after her but was pinned down by dozens of people. As Mrs. Smith was about to leave, she said, "You don't deserve her." Chapter 13. Davis's perspective. There was actually nothing overly inappropriate between him and Lisa. Julia misunderstood his relationship with Lisa, and he had always been too lazy to explain. At most, they hugged a few times. They hadn't really done anything, so why was Julia so angry? In his frustration, hurtful words slipped out. He even said that Julia should die. Emotional betrayal is still betrayal. It wasn't until much later that he realized the cruelty of his actions. He thought that as long as nothing physical happened, he hadn't wronged Julia. At most, they hugged. What's the big deal? In the business world, it's just part of the game, nothing more. So, he accepted Lisa's advances without guilt. Then, one mistake led to another, and there was no turning back. After this incident, the company's stock plummeted. All the work he had done over the years was ruined, and he was removed from his position as CEO. Lisa was kicked out of the company, never to be hired again. These scandals would be recorded in her resume, directly affecting her future job prospects. Any decent company wouldn't hire her again. This was their retribution, Julia's revenge. Chapter 14. Davis's perspective. After using all his money to fill the company's financial gaps, all he had left was the house he shared with Julia. Until the moment he opened the door, he still held on to a sliver of hope. It was just a dream, right? If he opened the door, Julia would be there, waiting for him. The room was pitch black, and he didn't even dare turn on the lights. If Julia were there, she'd definitely whine about why the lights weren't on, asking if he was trying to scare her to death. Yes, she was afraid of the dark too. But later, he had abandoned her for someone else. All because of a grudge. The computer was in sleep mode, faintly glowing. He suddenly remembered the day Julia had pulled him to watch a movie. It took him several tries to click the mouse because his hands were shaking so badly. Cold sweat soaked the surface of the mouse. A wife pretending to be dead, a doting husband. He sat frozen on the couch, watching the entire movie. In the end, the truth was revealed. The wife pretended to be dead because she had a terminal illness and wanted to make it easier for her deeply loving husband when she eventually passed. The husband in the movie found his wife adorable. But what did he think of it at the time? Movies are just movies. In real life, I'd be so annoyed. He didn't even watch it to the end, missing the chance to learn the truth. How heartbroken must Julia have been at that time? He searched the house for all the ketchup bottles, only to find that not a single one had been opened. All the blood he thought was fake, made with ketchup, had actually been the blood Julia coughed up as her illness worsened. And yet, he had never doubted it. How could he have never doubted it? Later, one day, the house caught fire. The blaze was fierce, and by the time he got back, everything was gone. He had always taken great care of the house, and there were no issues that could have caused the fire. But on that day, it suddenly ignited without warning. Inside were Julia's remaining belongings. He desperately tried to rush in. Several firefighters had to hold him down. "That's all I have left of my wife. She only left me with so little." No one would let him in. All he could do was kneel on the ground, helplessly watching the house burn down, little by little. A gust of wind blew by. He suddenly looked up, frantically searching around. But there was nothing. "Juju? Is that you?" No one answered him. He held his head in his hands. "I was wrong. It's all my fault." Everyone around him looked at him like he was crazy. Julia. Julia had come back. She wasn't even willing to leave him with the last of her things. Davis collapsed to the ground in despair. Someone asked him, "Do you need a doctor?" He looked up blankly. "Can someone save her?" "Who?" "Save my wife. She's dead." He was sent to a mental hospital. His memory began to fade. He forgot more and more, but he never forgot one name. His notebook was filled with Julia's name, and he still kept a photo of her. The doctors and nurses were cruel to him. If he didn't take his medicine, they beat him with sticks. He didn't want to take the medicine. He wasn't sick. He still remembered his wife was Julia. He wanted to go out and find her. But unless he got better, he couldn't be discharged. So, he started planning his escape. The first time he tried to escape, he failed and was locked in the basement without food for 3 days and nights. The second time, he failed and was beaten until he couldn't move. The third time, he succeeded. He ran and ran, until he reached a restaurant. He took out Julia's photo and asked, "Do you know my wife?" Someone did remember Julia. She was the only one who would come to a couple's restaurant alone. Her face was so pale that even we, as strangers, could tell something was wrong. How could her family not care? She said she once had a husband who loved her very much. But now, she can't find him. Hearing this, his eyes suddenly widened, and he stumbled out of the restaurant. The sunlight hit him, but he only felt bone-chilling cold. He gritted his teeth and steadied himself. After a long time, he finally wiped away the tears on his face.